Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Matthew Taylor and I'm joining you from the northern beaches of Sydney, where I'm honoured to be on the traditional lands of the Camaragal people. I'd like to acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of this amazing land we inhabit, and they've been caring for this country for over many millennia. So I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And as is our general custom, please feel free to use the chat function at the bottom of your screens if you'd like to introduce yourself and type a greeting from the country you're joining us from today. A little bit of housekeeping. We're going to be recording this session so that it's accessible to participants afterwards, and obviously that can be sent on to any friends or colleagues who may have missed it. And if you've got any questions about the content today, please type them into the chat at the bottom, not the Q&A. We're using the chat function. And if you've got a question, we've got some time at the end where we can direct those to Chris and Alison. So let me introduce Chris and Alison. They live on our Carnarvon Station, which is the subject of today's webinar. And the reserve is 600 kilometres northwest of Brisbane on the lands of the Bidjara people. Chris there is our healthy landscape manager, and he covers Central Queensland, where he manages a number of reserves and also all the relationships you need to have with other landowners in the region for organising things like feral control and fire. Alison, his wife, is our learning and development officer, and she's responsible for ensuring that all our people have the necessary training and development required to safely undertake the wide variety of conservation tasks across the country. And as you can imagine, when you get to use quite a lot of agricultural tools, that we need to be very careful of the safety of our people. Now, they've been at Carnarvon for 12 years, so they really know the place intimately. And that's why we asked them to join us today for this webinar. And they've achieved a considerable amount in that time. And I think they'd probably agree that top of that is actually managing to raise and homeschool 3 daughters, including remote learning from the bush. So today we'll talk a little bit about that side of the family side of things as well, and ask them to talk about the conservation values of the reserve and all the work we're doing. So just to give you a picture of Carnarvon, we acquired it as Bush Heritage in 1991, and it was the first really large reserve that Bush Heritage ever purchased. Prior to that, we had much smaller reserves that we felt were within our ability to buy and manage. But we knew we had to grow, we knew we had to be more ambitious and find some really big properties to really look after the land. So in 1991, we acquired 59,000 hectares, which is located in the Brigalow Belt, which is just to the west, or the Carnarvon is just to the west of the rather famous Carnarvon Gorge, which you may have visited previously. But it actually sits just on the western edge of the Great Dividing Range, which means the rivers and the water that fall on Carnarvon actually drain southwest, not to the coast, and enter the Warrego and ultimately into the Darling River. It's a fabulous place. I've been very fortunate to visit it. It's got native grasslands, wonderful woodlands, vine thickets, and some beautiful natural springs. So welcome, Chris and Alison. It's been a long time since I was sitting around a campfire with you. I have very fond memories of that.
Hi, Matthew. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Bidjara people, past, present and emerging for the region. Yeah, Carnarvon, a fantastic place. It's mountainous, it's rugged, heavily timbered. The eastern third is a basalt flow 27 million years ago. So it's very rocky, with the ancient Zamia cycads scattered around the place. Very typical of the region. Yeah, it's fairly remote. We're 3 hours from our nearest town. A lot of black soil, so it doesn't take much rain to prevent us from moving much or put a spanner in the works to the works program. So we're on as Matthew said, we're on the western fall of the Great Divide. Essentially, the watershed is the boundary. Yeah, it's got its advantages in regard to our weeds or our weed problems. We don't have downstream issues coming into us. Yeah, it's look, we range from 600 metres in the southeast, 1,200 in the southeast, down to 600 in the southwest. So it's quite a variation to altitude across the reserve. We're roughly 60 kilometres long and 10 to 15 kilometres wide, and that that has a lot of climate variance as well in regard to rainfall and temperatures. Yeah, so Carnarvon protects a lot of cultural sites for the Bidjara people. We have quarry sites, ochre pits, scar trees, burials, and the list goes on throughout the reserve.
It sounds wonderful, Chris, and I know it is a glorious place. Now, I mentioned that you've been there for 12 years and raised your 3 beautiful daughters there. Perhaps you and Alison can talk a bit about your experience of that and how you've had, what it's taken to manage a very expansive landscape and, raise your family.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Yes, what an experience. How lucky are we? We feel very privileged to have had the life we've had at Carnarvon. And our little 3 children, we can see on the screen there, who are not so little anymore. When we came for 12 months, incidentally, thinking that would be a great 12 months for the family while they were young. The girls were 5, 4 and 1 when we arrived. I think young Charlotte turned 1 the week we were here. And yeah, the journey began from there, I guess. We, before I knew it, we were needing to start school. And again, that journey, we thought we'll do another year. And as we got stuck into the work here and the busyness of life and children, 10 years later, here I am to tell the story of 10 years in the schoolroom with our girls. They've now gone off to boarding school. So yeah, it's been a fabulous time for us as a family. We feel very privileged to have had the opportunity, and still a lot of work to do, of course, but we are slowly getting there.
Yeah, it's been great. I'm really fortunate to have raised our kids here. It's given them a lot of things I think that other kids wouldn't manage to receive growing up in town.
They're very grounded, our girls, aren't they?
A lot of resilience, because we can't do everything. It's just distance. A bit of rain and whatever we had planned is off. So it's been great.
Very practical, I guess, the kids, and I guess that comes with any sort of lifestyle when you're close to nature and on the land. We're very proud of the girls, they just seem to go to work. If there's an issue that they need to deal with, they seem to cope fairly well. So that's been a big thing we see time and time again as they transition into the next stage of their lives in high school now.
Yeah, so Carnarvon's the only home the girls know, so that's how they see it. It's home. They've got a pretty close connection to it.
Yeah, we had to make quite a big decision there when they started to get into high school. It was very much a family decision. We initially thought, Chris and I, that we would move to a more regional centre and do high school with them. But it very much was the girls, as Chris was saying, this is their home, I guess. So they very much made the decision that they'd go off to boarding school and can't get enough of the place. But that's just a testament, I guess, to the landscape here. It's fairly amazing.
Well, I remember when I visited that the pet wallaby was on the scene, and that was amazing to see how they looked after the wallaby that had just appeared out of the bush, hadn't it, and became the household pet, or one of the household pets.
I was just about to say, I think we've brought up every orphan there is to bring up, native and non-native, in this household. The kids love their animals. Sorry, I'm fading in and out there, but I'm trying hard to stay still. So the wallaby, Macca, we called the pet wallaby, Macca the macropod. He was quite a hit. And as you say, Matthew, he came out of the bushes there when we had some supporters visit. And Chris was able to, we'd released him, and Chris had decided that, and we'd decided that he was gone. We hadn't seen him for a week or so. And Chris was able to pull out a biscuit, I believe. I wasn't there that day, but I believe he was able to track him down and he was a pet, but I think a lot of the supporters at the time thought he might have been a wild wallaby, but he was actually one of our pets that we'd brought up. And yeah, so they're great little wildlife carers, our girls.
I like the fact that Chris happens to have a biscuit in his back pocket at any time. You never know when you might need it.
Yeah.
So, Chris, perhaps you can tell us, when we first purchased Carnarvon back in 2001, it was that big step forward in our vision to grow our impact, but that involved revitalising what had been a 140-year-old cattle station, I think. Can you give us some idea of what it actually takes to turn a working cattle station into a conservation property?
Yeah, that's right. It was 140 years of grazing, and at the time of purchase, there'd been some fairly dry years, so the property wasn't looking that good, and had a fairly large population of brumbies at the time. So we've carried on successive managers who have done a great job putting together management plans, assessing the conservation values and addressing the threats to those values. A fine example on the screen there of a monitoring site with high brumby pressure on the left-hand side and minimal brumbies on the right-hand side. So the priority, I suppose, has been establishing a stock-proof boundary fence, and that's been ongoing. We've only just completed that this year. The last 6 kilometres was completed of boundary fencing. So we are noticing a huge reduction in domesticated stock coming onto the reserve, which is great. We've got great neighbours that go to great lengths to remove their stock off the property. Over the years, there's been big programs to remove the feral herbivores, horses, pigs, and any unbranded cattle. And to date, this is probably the cleanest I've seen the reserve in regards to feral animals. So they've introduced burning programs that we're carrying on with. Carnarvon's a very fire-prone area, typically lightning strikes through September to November before we start getting significant rain. So planned burning is a really big part of the role, trying to break the property up into a mosaic of different age classes using fire to just try and make the spread of those large uncontrolled fires minimal and minimal impact. Weed issues are ongoing. A lot of the native grasslands were cultivated into sorghum, oats, sunflowers. So that's an ongoing process. They're rehabilitating really well. Some of them not so well. We're still working on rehabilitating, and that's where the seed has come into play, utilising native seed that we've harvested here to try and rejuvenate or rehabilitate degraded areas, but also in our earthworks that we're doing to rectify any gully head erosion, any erosion issues that need reseeding. So just touching on weeds, we've got bufflegrass and Johnson grass as our 2 major threats to the conservation values of the reserve. That's where our priorities lie. We'll probably spend 3 months a year through the growing season spraying those weeds on roadsides and across the grasslands to try and minimise spread. We're having issues there with introduced annuals appearing where we spray, but their threat rating's just not equivalent to bufflegrass. 20-odd natural springs on the reserve. Some of them were pretty susceptible to damage from hard-hoofed animals, been fenced just to exclude the initial, while the initial programs were underway, to exclude animals from them. And luckily we're at a point now where we're not needing to maintain those fences, so they can come down. The springs are looking fantastic, even through our 4 recent very dry years, well below average. Those springs are still running and and doing really well. It sort of sums it up, really.
That's fantastic. And you mentioned the you had native grasslands as one of the features of Carnarvon, and in fact, my background is a shot of the native bluegrass from nice and low on a nice summer evening. That's given you an opportunity to actually, you mentioned it, harvest that grass seed to rehabilitate earthworks on the reserve, but also to sell that to other places nearby who are doing similar work. Perhaps you can give us a sense of what that actually involves to go out and start I guess it's a commercial business, isn't it? Although a small one.
Yeah, it was a very steep learning curve, and a business plan was put together initially. So we've completed 2 years of harvesting, and as you can see there, we have a trailer brush harvester. So the idea of how that works is it's like a street sweeper. It's rotating at around 600 RPM ideally. When the seed floret is right, we'll drive through, and that will just pluck the right seed and put it into the hopper in the back of the harvester. So we're not cutting the seed. We're only taking the ripe seed. The rest of the plant's undamaged, and in a good season, it'll continue to flower and produce more seed. Essentially, we'd be lucky to be taking 10 to 15% of the available seed in one harvest, and we might get 3 seed set events in a good season. So it's very sustainable, and we're monitoring that to ensure that that is the case. It all originated with a chance meeting of Director of Highlands Environmental, who came out to Carnarvon, and he could see a bit of a possibility. So we nutted things out, and yeah, we've had 2 successful years, and hopefully more to come. Just fantastic to see conservation being able to generate an income to support the works in a sustainable way. Bigger plans, we're hoping, with tree seed as well. So yeah, I'll just to give you a bit of background, the 2 furthest grasslands are 30 kilometres apart, and they receive vastly different rainfall because of their separation in the altitude. So there's a lot of monitoring and recording of rainfall, just keeping an eye on the phase of the growth of each of the plant on each grassland in particular, before we can decide, well, yep, I think that's right to start harvesting, and then we'll move in, and we have to juggle grasslands as they become ripe. So not all the seed on a native Florida bluegrass will ripen at once. It's a knack that our natives have for longevity. So yeah, we're only taking sort of maybe 10 to 15% of each floret in that one growing event. So the process is, as you saw, we harvest. It's then put into wool packs from the trailer, and then taken up to a disused grain shed, or a grain shed that came with the property. We lay the grass seed out at about 100 mils thick across 8 very large tarps, 8 metre by 8 metre tarps, and we turn it daily for it to be dry enough to bag over 7 days. So fairly laborious. The drying is the bottleneck in our process, and yeah, we're looking into sort of mechanical ways of how we might be able to speed the drying up. Yeah, so it's a concentration of weed effort, particularly across the grasslands, and depending on the season and how the rain falls, is depending on our biggest threats in regard to weeds. This year we received some 125 mils of winter rain. So as soon as the temperature warmed up, we've got clockweed now is the major weed that's it's outcompeted the grasses in a lot of areas. So harvesting becomes a bit tricky when we need to avoid those weed areas to guarantee a clean seed harvest. And it's not just bluegrass, I will add. Yeah, it's a mix of 20 native species, and that's the beauty of it, that it's a complete package when it's used in rehabilitation. So It's ensuring an ecosystem function, I suppose, or assisting an ecosystem function, utilised in that sort of capacity. Yeah.
Where do you distribute the seeds to, Chris? Is it just the surrounding region, or more broadly? It'd be interesting to know what sort of other projects are benefiting from it, if you know that.
Yeah, demand is fairly high. So to date, all of our seed is usually sold in 1 or 2 lots, and it's going to offset rejuvenation and to mining rehabilitation within the bioregion. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And Alison, I hear that the whole family gets roped in. You mentioned the girls set themselves to whatever the job at hand is, but I believe they've all pitched in at harvest time.
Yes, Matthew, nothing like a bit of slave labour over the school holidays. And of course, that was one of the advantages actually of COVID last year. You can see there on the screen, the girls, that was their job actually. When we were all locked down, they were here for another 5 weeks, of course, back to the home. We opened up the doors again in the Carnarvon schoolroom. And
Yes.
each afternoon they would race out and turn the seed for us. As Chris is saying, that's probably the really intense job that comes with this, is having to go out there and try and dry that seed out.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
And did you have to incentivize them at all?
We did do a little bit. We did heighten the pocket money for those weeks. There needed to be some incentive, yes.
Excellent. Good to know.
But no, they're pretty good. As I said, well, I'm a parent, fairly proud of them, but they're great at just pitching in, and I guess that's part of where we live, and all working here together. Everyone, if there's something to be done, you just jump in and all help out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Matthew, I probably do need to explain that 70% of the bluegrass grasslands in the bioregion have been converted to intensive agriculture, either cropping or grazing. So it is very important that we can get the seed out there and try and rehabilitate a lot of these areas that have lost their bluegrass across them.
Yes. And is it a grass or the grass species, is it attractive to pastoralists to have in their native pasture?
It's very attractive. It is. It just it can't be grazed as intensively. It needs spelling so it can seed again. Yeah.
Yes. And you mentioned that you'd started a couple of years ago. I think it was April 2020, wasn't it? Were there any lessons learned from that first harvest, that you've managed to incorporate subsequently?
Oh, hundreds of them. Yeah, it was a very steep learning curve. I think, as I said, it's knowing nothing about seed harvesting, and it's a very closed industry because everyone's looking after their market. So it's very hard to try and get information about harvesting, drying, that type of thing. So now we've learned a lot. Sending the seed off for analysis at labs for purity, germination, and content. It's been a very steep learning curve, and still a lot more to learn.
That's excellent. And have you seen any outcomes in the areas that you have harvested? I guess one of the outcomes you want is not to see anything, isn't it? And that for it to continue, just as strongly.
That's exactly right. That's in part of the business plan was setting up a monitoring program to ensure that we're not changing the composition of the grasslands, that the grasslands are doing what they're supposed to do. So a lot of monitoring going on pre and post harvest, and as I said, Highlands Environmental come out annually and do their surveying as well as our ecologists, and that's pretty in depth. It includes soil testing just to pick up the smallest of changes. Yeah.
Yes, fantastic. And one of the things about this is it's actually piloting for bush heritage, and one of our sort of newer, more innovative approaches, isn't it, to having reserves start to help pay for themselves. And also it's part of our 2030 strategy, which has just been finalized to plan our growth over the next 7 or 8 years, where we are going to actively engage with the farming community much more strongly, and that means trialling a number of initiatives where we might be able to generate income or have impact on how agriculturalists manage their land. So I guess in that sense, that must be quite satisfying to know that it's contributing, from the income.
Oh, very satisfying, and to know that it's sustainable. That's the big thing, that it had to be sustainable. We looked at a few different options. None of them, went close to being as sustainable as this is. So, the next project is tree seed. Like the grass seed, we need to test the market, make sure it's solid and reliable. So early days, that's the next one we're hoping to trial. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, that leads nicely into, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the role of Carnarvon as a refuge. I know you've got the springs you've mentioned, and I know the landscape around has a high degree of clearance, and particularly the Brigalow belt, which is one of the most threatened ecological communities. Can you tell us a bit about how the reserve functions in that broader landscape and looks after the native flora and fauna?
Well, particularly with climate modelling, the Greater Carnarvons is seen as a refuge area for native species. So that really enhances the importance of the project. I think with our management, excuse me, with the controlled burning, the weed management, we're leaving that biomass for nature for ecosystem function, protecting the springs, waterways, controlling weeds, reintroducing controlled burning, and trying to remove as many feral animals as we can out of the system. Yeah.
Excellent. And I mentioned Brigalow. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because I know it's something that registers on the national level quite often in terms of what the Brigalow woodlands are, and whether what Carnarvon can do to support retention of those fairly limited amounts now that's left in the landscape.
Yeah, so we're pretty fortunate to have numerous small stands of Brigalow on the reserve. They're a high priority focus for protection, very susceptible to fire, along with our vine thickets and those communities. So a big emphasis on management, excuse me, trying to ensure that we can exclude hot fire from those areas, and also weeds, which particularly bufflegrass loves the more fertile soils. Burns 3 times hotter than the natives, and seems to kill any Brigalow regen on the fringes. So it's a battle, and it's something you see within the region anywhere that's trying to protect Brigalow. Bufflegrass is becoming the biggest threat, and to the extent where grazing is becoming an accepted way of reducing that fire risk underneath the Brigalow.
Right. Cool. Well, listen, just a reminder, if people have got any questions, I do have a couple that's come through, Chris, which we'll get to in just a second, around the bluegrass harvesting. But please, if you have any questions, do pop them in the chat. We'll spend 10 minutes on them just after the next question. So looking forward, we've looked at the past and what it's taken to get us here. What are you both looking forward to, in the coming year, and perhaps, a bit further out as well?
I'm really keen to try and it's a crazy couple of months through till the end of April, May, where we're spraying. We've had some really good November rain, 150 millimeters. So our spraying season's started a few months early. Spraying, we've got our prescribed burning and then seed harvesting before the frost set in. So to get that done, all done well, is the tricky bit. So looking forward to having that completed. Yeah, and further afield, trying to progress the tree seed program. Fantastic.
What about you, Alison?
Well, apart from looking forward to our girls coming back in just a couple of weeks now, extra little bit of help around the place is always good. So they'll be home soon. But yeah, look, we've just had a huge amount of rain here, as Chris is saying. So just to be able to watch the country respond now over the next couple of months, this is a beautiful time of the year for us. Lots of hard work, but with these weeds. But yeah, it's a lovely time of the year, and yeah, when the family's together, of course, that's pretty special for us.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing what it's like living out on reserve with your family and the fantastic things that are happening at Carnarvon. Let's go to a couple of questions that have been coming in. The first couple are around the native grasslands, and the first one was, I'll put them together, Chris, because you may be able to answer them together. What species of grass are you using to revegetate where you need to do it? And you mentioned bluegrass, but I think you also flagged that there was up to 20 species. And linked to that, with the increase in native grasses, have you found that native finch numbers have increased? So I guess we have a finch enthusiast joining us today. I'm one as well. And I know you have a keen eye for the birds there. So perhaps I can throw those two questions across to you.
That's really interesting. Just in the last 6 months, I've noticed a really large increase in finch numbers. I'm not sure why that is, whether it's seasonal conditions broader, but yeah, it's really good to see. Yeah, zebras, double bars, things that I haven't seen here in those numbers for a long time. Well, since I've been here. Yeah.
Fantastic. And the different species, could you give us a bit more of a sense of what the grass species are that we're harvesting apart from the bluegrass?
Yeah, so satin top, oat grass, there's kangaroo grass, forest bluegrass, pitted blue, scented top, purple wiregrass. Yeah, the list goes on. Wallaby grass, shot grass, all varying, all different types of seeds. Some of them are grain seed. So all very different types of seeds, which makes the drying a little bit trickier. They won't be consistent in any way. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And there's a question from Jane here, which is, how are the tree species doing, given there's now more natural regeneration from having the grazers off the reserve? Have you seen any, over the time you've been there, have you seen any changes in the natural regeneration?
Definitely, yeah. So without that herd impact, we're seeing a lot of regeneration, but also we're trying to balance that out with introduced fire. So with our cooler burns, so that we are getting a different age class of all vegetation, not only grasses but trees as well, shrubs. So from your lower story, mid story to upper canopy, trying to increase that diversity. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Excellent. Now, here's a very interesting question from Maury, which is, what other labour do you have to use, apart from the slave labour with the children, to help you accomplish this huge array of tasks? I think that's talking to, is it just you, Chris, with Alison helping and the kids, or are there other staff members involved or contractors?
Yeah, no, not at all. Not just us. No, we're fortunate enough to have. As of yesterday, it was 12 months. Our field officer, Glenn, his wife, Gabby, and their 2 young children have moved to Carnarvon last November. Yeah, fantastic having those resources on site. Glenn's really capable and very hardworking, but we also use volunteers as well. They give us a hand throughout the year with everything we do. Yeah.
Fantastic. And an interesting question related to the grazing and fire regime, which is, without the extra grazing pressure from the ferals and I guess from the native kangaroos as well, and wallabies as well, do the native grasses constitute a fire risk? And should does that impact when you choose to cut the grass? Or rather, sorry, harvest the grass, because it's not cut, is it?
No, it doesn't really. We still have, we still use fire on the grasslands. They respond really well to fire, and we use fire as a weed management tool as well on the grasslands on a 1 to 3 year interval, and then extending that further out into the woodlands. So no, the biomass in the grasses never gets too great. it will usually lay over and start matting, which, as you know, reduces the structure of the fuel, so the fire loses that intensity. Yeah.
Great, excellent, excellent. And also a question which is one of the challenges of conservation, which is from Flo, which is, now the property is fully fenced, does that impact native animals trying to get in to use the place as a refugium, you know, if they're struggling elsewhere, you know, which I guess is one of those things we always have to weigh up, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. No, typically the boundary fences are 4 barbed wire with about a 600 millimetre gap under the bottom wire. So that allows for movement of most natives. We're not seeing any evidence of that excluding any natives. And then our boundary to the north and east is unfenced as it adjoins national parks. So we've got common management goals. So we've got free movement over an enormous area of the Carnarvons for the natives. Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic. And a couple more things to do with your wonderful girls. You know, the question is, do you know what their plans are for after school? Because I know they're. You mentioned earlier on before we started that they're in the mid-teens, from I think you said 17 down to 13, didn't you, Alison? Are they indicating whether they want to stay in conservation or science, or, you know, where are they heading?
They definitely want and need to be on the land, apparently. Yeah, so I think our eldest daughter, yes, will definitely, she's looking at science for sure in a couple of years. But yeah, you know what teenagers are like, lots of different things being thrown around, but I think all three of them will definitely be working on the land in one capacity or another for sure. Yes.
That's fantastic. Well, I wanted to just relate to you this lovely message from Jennifer, which has come up in the chat. She says that she joined Bush Heritage during the fundraising campaign for Carnarvon, and which she helped with the purchase of back in the day, and then was able to actually visit Carnarvon in 2008. So she's just passing on a thanks and acknowledgement for how much that's been, all the work that's been done. So it's lovely that you're able to see the changes that have been wrought from that support. And so it's a good point to flag that if there's anything that Chris and Alison have talked about today that has really drawn your interest, and if you're thinking of supporting the work, then please do head to the link that will appear in the chat, where you can make contact with us and make a donation if you'd like to. Just waiting to see if there's any more questions that might come in. I think we've probably, oh, here's one. Wet season. I know that the house, your house, it lies just across a creek, and at times it cuts you off, doesn't it? And I think you mentioned that in the early years there was a fairly considerable amount of time you were banished from the reserve by the floods, weren't you? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Banished.
Yeah, so the wet season 2010, it wasn't only this region, but a lot of Queensland was flooded. But Carnarvon received, I think it was somewhere around 23 inches overnight, and it just continued to rain. If it was going to storm, we'd get 4 inches, 100 mils. It was an incredible year. Anyway, that has done a lot of damage at the time. That was our main access road coming in. The grasslands were 1.5 meters underwater. There was no vehicle access. We had to come in and assess, come in by air and try and assess the damage. And we couldn't get back on the reserve for 4 months after that. It took a long time to dry out. So when they mentioned La Nina, I get a little bit nervous, particularly this year.
Will
it happen again? Yes. Okay. Well,
although we should say, Matthew, thanks to some wonderful donors, there's been a lot of work go into the infrastructure of our access roads over the years, hasn't there?
Yeah. So
we're hoping for the best this year.
A lot of drainage and has been done since then, repairing the roads. So hopefully we won't be hit that hard again. Yeah.
So maybe there'll be a little bridge over that final gully as you approach your property.
It's not uncommon to be sort of stuck for 4 weeks or so every year through the wet. Yeah, it's sort of 200 k's of dirt road either way we go. So yeah, access gets a bit limited at that time of the year.
Yes. We have a couple of last questions, I think, here, which is, are you using drones to help you cover the distance? Because I know in other parts of bush heritage, we are very much using drones for scientific research and for help in monitoring. And have they made their way onto Carnarvon yet?
They have. We've just started using a drone, particularly for firework. The fire season of 2019, it was really handy to assess where fires were and the distance from our breaks and how much time we had before we needed to utilise those breaks. In regard to the weed work, I've been trying really hard, but unless you're into cropping, no one's really interested in looking at it. I think it's coming. But I'm pretty positive it wouldn't be that hard to map weeds and treat weeds with a drone. It's just there's no focus in conservation. It's all about cropping at the moment.
Gotcha. Yes, yes. Excellent. Well, I think that's all the questions we've had that have come through. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us, this is the last webinar in our spring series. Of course, there will be more next year. Thank you for all the wonderful supporters who've joined us today, because I know you support us in many ways, some of you with regular monthly gifts, some of us one-off donations, and also considering Bush Heritage in your will. So thank you for joining us. Hopefully this has given you a bit of a sense of what life is like out on our reserves. And if people would like to visit Carnarvon Station, it is one of our reserves that is available for the hardy bush campers. I stress this because I think you'll probably confirm this, Chris and Alison. It's very basic bush camping. You have to bring everything yourself, but between 1st of June and 30th of September, you can visit and camp, and basically there's a series of guided drives and walks you can do there, and I can attest to the state it's a fantastic location, an amazing place, and you will be pretty much by yourselves in an amazing place. So please consider that if you'd like to. And to finish off the webinar, if you'd like to stick around for a couple of minutes, there's some lovely images of Carnarvon that the wonderful Megan, who's organised this event today, has put together, and you'll see a little bit more of the wildlife. And thanks, Chris and Alison, for joining us. It's been fantastic to hear some of the stories, and I look forward to seeing you again soon when COVID allows.
For sure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.